To another episode of the Women Writing Intentionally show with Jenny Alberti and Tracey Rampling Brown. Join us as we talk all things writing and publishing, from insider secrets to our own author journeys. We are committed to providing a safe platform for women to share their stories, knowledge, and truth without fear of judgment, criticism, or betrayal. By coming together in the genuine spirit of collaboration, we provide opportunities for growth, healing, and transformation that benefit all women, authors and readers alike. Our vision is to help our authors intentionally build an aligned legacy and portfolio that supports their mission as a woman, human being, and business owner. So thanks everybody for being here with us today. We are going to be talking about developing confidence and the journey going from writer to published author. So, hey Jenny, welcome. So awesome to have you here.
Hi, Tracey.
So we've done this book writing and book publishing thing like a few times now between the two of us. And we've worked with lots of other authors, and we have also, as publishers now, had the opportunity to nurture groups of authors through this process. And I thought it would be super fun if we give people a little bit of insight about some of the issues that we see cropping up, either from our co-authors or, things that pop up in our groups. So do you have anything that you want to touch on with that?
I think that we should start talking about visibility. I feel as though I have a lot to say about this. Considering the business that I had in coaching had a lot to do about visibility and the fear, especially for women, to be seen and to be heard, and for their voices to be heard, and for them to get this visibility, especially on a global sort of platform, right? And that's really what becoming a published author is. It's a global platform, and it's kind of scary. So let's dive into that.
Yeah, I love it. So I know when we did Aligned Leaders, it was both of our first books. So it was our first time putting our writing out there in the public eye, where it couldn't be taken back or taken down like a blog post, it's a different journey than just writing social content or writing blog posts or articles, isn't it?
Yeah, well, you can't delete the book. You can't delete your chapter. It's like it's a done deal. So yeah, writing a Facebook post or creating a blog post or whatever, you could take it down. Like, you have full control over that. And you can control, even on Facebook, you can control who sees it. Like, you can select who is going to read your words. Whereas when you become a published author, you cannot do that.
Yeah. So, if you don't want mom and dad to see you writing about some of your deepest, darkest secrets, or if you don't want your friends to see what you wrote about them, or it's really hard to hide that when it's freely available in any bookstore on the internet.
Yeah. So I think for me, a little bit of the imposter syndrome sinks into the visibility thing, because when I was writing my first chapter, and it being my first chapter that was going to get published, I was like, is this good enough for not only my family, but my friends and people that see me as an expert online? Is this good enough for them to read? And am I a good enough writer for them to read? So that is part of it. But the other part of the visibility thing, I know for me, is like, it's like, you're not really supposed to be visible as a woman. Like, You're not supposed to be saying those things, right? Like,
Mm-hmm.
especially what our book was about, right? That first book was about ditching societal norms and like, so.
And doing it unashamedly with no regret. Like, that is a big thing, like
Yeah.
huge thing. And,
Yeah.
some of our co-authors actually really struggled with that once the book came out. At least one of the authors that I know practically shut down her business after the book came out because she had a little bit of a collapse, because there's a difference between when you write your chapter, it's just you and your computer. So what you write, it's still like writing in your journal.
Yeah.
And then when you submit it to the publisher, it's being read by the editor. They're giving you some feedback, but their feedback usually is like mostly based on grammar or fluency of like flow. It's not judging you for what is the content of your story. So it's like a safe container because it's just you and the editor. And it still feels like it's in this private container. And then on launch day, even though in the lead up to launch, you've been telling your friends and family, this book is coming out, it's going to be awesome, please go and buy it, please support us. But then on launch day, it's like, holy fuck, I can't take this back now. Like, it is out in the world. And is it safe for me to be seen? Like, it brings up, especially like, as you said, as a woman, it brings up like the mother wound. Is it safe to be seen? Is it safe to do these things? It brings up things like this. It brings up all the wounds, actually, like all of which is one of the reasons that we were so inspired to put together the Wounded Women series, because it really is about that, taking back our voices and making it okay. But it taps into a lot of our deepest fears.
Yeah, the visibility aspect for me was really challenging, because the whole thing with putting a book out in general, how are people looking at me? Like, who the fuck does she think she is? Like, she's an author? Yeah, okay, right? Like, yeah, okay, sure, right? So for me, it was like, oh my God, like, what am I doing? And what's going to happen? Like, what are people going to say? And is this good enough, right? So it was kind of from the point where for me, it was from where I turned in my chapter all the way through launch day. I was just like, oh my God, oh my God, oh my God. Like, this is really scary. It was really scary, but it still felt like I always wanted to do it, but that doesn't mean it wasn't scary. It was really scary.
Can I ask you one question, Jenny?
Yeah, go ahead.
Before you submitted your chapter, like after you wrote it, did you let anybody else read it before you submitted it to the publisher for editing?
Yes, I did.
Okay, and how did that make you feel?
It was my mom, who I love, because that was the only person that felt safe.
Mm-hmm. So I'll confess, I did also submit before I put my chapter out for Aligned Leaders. I had, I think, about 3 friends. So one of them was a friend who was also a co-author in the book. One of them was another trusted friend who was like one of my accountability partners that I was meeting up with weekly. And I forget who the third person was. And so in terms of developing confidence, I think for me, I don't know if having your mum read your chapter as well was the same for you, but I feel like having a little bit of that feedback and having somebody say to you, oh, this is really good, or oh, maybe you should restructure some of these things, because my friends didn't pull any punches. They're like, okay, so some of these grammar things need fixing, Trace, and like maybe if you move these paragraphs around, you'll have a better flow, and you can circle it back, actually did make me feel more confident before I submitted it the first time. So I don't know, was that similar for you, or?
No, because my mom would love anything that I did, regardless if it was absolute shit or not. She would be like, "Oh my God, that was the best thing I've ever read in my life." So, no,
Oh,
it was no confidence boosting for me for that. No, not the same.
Okay.
That's a good point, and that is a really good tip for you to be sharing. I did not do that with either one of my chapters. They both went to mom.
I only actually really did it with aligned leaders with my first one, but I did actually use that tip with my authors in Lunar Wisdom and told them that as part of like the self-editing process, which is not like, it's not like we say you have to go and self-edit your work before you send it in, but it's always a good idea, especially when you're new to writing, I think, or if you're not a confident writer, to always, as part of the mix of things that you do, have somebody else that you trust, but that also will be interested in the material to read over your chapter. And so with my Lunar Wisdom authors, obviously, the material that we're writing about is quite niche. So asking your husband or your sister or your wife or your best friend or your cousin or something who might not be into working with the moon is probably not going to give you the best feedback. So I mentioned to them that finding a like-minded person or somebody that you know is actually either going to have knowledge of or appreciate the content contained within the chapter, because sometimes the people we love are actually not our ideal client or our ideal readers, and so their feedback's not quite as relevant, because especially like you said with your mom's going to tell you that it's amazing whether it's good or not. So
Yes.
And one of the things, like with my authors, I also suggested that because it was such a niche topic, that they could share their chapters with each other and get some feedback before they submit it, because that obviously, like, they're clearly all into exactly the same thing. That doesn't necessarily work for all books and all collaborations, because not every project has that same specificity. But yeah, so I'm a big fan of getting people to read, and in the normal publishing industry, that is sometimes referred to as having alpha or beta readers, where they will go through and look at your chapter and point out things like, if you're a fiction writer, they might point out continuity or plot hole pieces. They'll pull you up on grammar sometimes. Sometimes they can be quite harsh on those things. But what they're doing is they're really trying to give you feedback that will allow you to fix those things before you then go and pay an editor to go through and make it readable. Because if you, like specifically with fiction, if you've gone and left a ton of loose ends, that's actually not the editor's job to specifically fix those pieces for you or flag them for you, because that's not what you're paying them to do, unless you're doing developmental editing. But it is always a good idea to consider having some of those alpha or beta readers to do that before you then move on to the next process.
So what else can people do? Because in terms of confidence, since we're talking about, the work not being good enough, what do you think somebody can do in terms of that before they write it? Like, because a lot of times it's before it's even written that you come up with these blocks. And you can't even put the words out there. You can't put the words together because you're so wrapped up in feeling like this isn't something that you could do.
Yeah, so I think one of the things, and we actually touched on this quite a lot last week in depth, but I do think if you are struggling with confidence about knowing what to write or how to write, using journal prompts to help you to craft your chapter can help you develop that confidence, because it gives you specific information to answer, right? So if you're asking yourself, oh my God, have I even written something that meets the brief? You can go back and be like, okay. So if you don't happen to have journal prompts, so we've actually got an amazing freebie that you can download called Powerful Prompts to help you write your transformational story, but it really depends what you're writing about. And one of the things that I also like to tell my authors is to really look, especially if you're doing a multi-author collaborative book, but even if you're writing a solo book, if you know what your title is or your subtitle, really dive into that. Like, what does it mean? So, for example, with my Lunar Wisdom book, it's called Lunar Wisdom, Reconnecting with the Divine Feminine Through Rituals, Spells, Magic, and the Phases of the Moon. And so I broke that down for the authors. Like, what does reconnecting with the divine feminine mean to you? You know, like, what does, it's about working with the moon. What does your moon practice look like? What modalities do you use? Do you use crystals? Do you use divination? Do you meditate? Do you do yoga? Like, what is it that you do? What does your practice look like? How do you work with the moon? And so continuing to go back to those questions and dive a little deeper does help develop confidence, because at least like, it gives you that security of knowing that you are on track, at least. So it takes away one of the variables about, oh my God, am I even writing the right thing? And I'm sure you probably found that a bit with your Quiet and Badass authors as well.
Yeah. I think that the prompts are extremely helpful for focusing on having confidence with the project that you're working on or going to be working on. Personally, I think that you could still struggle with your confidence even at that point. And I think that actually going and doing something which I call pulling receipts will help you with not only the journal prompts, because you might still have problems answering those questions, right? You might have problems with, are my responses good enough? Can I turn that into something, right? So like continuing to go back to the root of where this confidence thing is. And if you pull your receipts, meaning you go back and you look at things that you have written before, and maybe it's blog posts, maybe it's Facebook posts, maybe it's, whatever. It could even
Re-listening to podcast episodes you've done where you've
I was
talked
just
about
gonna
them.
say, I was just gonna say, like, any sort of, whether it's written or it's spoken, go back and look at those things and review them and pull out the parts that you feel you really hit the nail on the head. Like, wow, I nailed that, right? And write those things down, because it's proof that you have done this before. It's proof that you feel as though you did really well at it. And I think that when you do that and you can accomplish pulling out a couple of really good, places where you express yourself properly, you think that it's really good, you articulated the way that you wanted to, it builds that confidence. And you may need to do that every time, you go to write something, which is totally fine. But kind of the farther back you go, I think that it really, when you pull it forward, it really does a huge amount of help. So,
No, I completely agree. I think that it comes down to really diving deeply into your message, right? Because what we say and what we write in our content is constantly reinforcing our beliefs and our message. And if we are even going back and using it, to use one of your favorite phrases, as a North Star, and picking up like what is the core of your message that you're constantly talking about. Like, what are those values that you hold, and how do they really shape and guide you as a person, or the clients that you lead through the journey? And how do you want to then share that with the reader in a longer format? And I mean, like I said, we talk about this a lot in terms of multi-author books, but this also works for service providers, for example, who are writing solo books, because quite a lot of the time you can take your signature program and effectively turn that into a book. Now, there are plenty of people that have done this, and one of the most famous examples of this is Denise Duffield-Thomas with her book Get Rich Lucky Bitch, because almost all of the information that is in Get Rich Lucky Bitch is part of her money bootcamp program. And it's the essence of her $2,000 program is in a book that you can buy for like $10 to $15. The difference is that obviously, and I think this is where people also get really confused in, and this probably comes back to the second part of this about stepping up from writer to published author. One of the things that holds people back with their confidence and is that there's also this other fear of giving everything away for free. And that if you publish it as a book, if you take your signature system and write it all down and put it out into a book, that people aren't then going to buy your program because you've already given it away. But that's actually not true, because even when you write a book, you're not giving them everything. I mean, you might feel like you're giving them everything, but they're not getting whatever the personal one-to-one or like group support is. They're not getting that access to you, that level of access where you are bringing your personal magic into the container. They're not getting feedback from you. They're reading it, but they still have to implement. And so I think that if you are doing a solo book, you can develop that confidence as well by really carving your expert niche, because you're putting your magic out there specifically. This is my methodology. This is how I do it. And this is what you can expect if you're going to work with me. And some of those people will become paid clients, and some of them won't. Some of them will buy your book and they'll be happy with that. But at the end of the day, you're still getting your message out there. And actually, this is something that came up in my author call on Thursday, where we were talking a lot about imposter syndrome. I'm like, oh my God, I don't know if what I wrote was good enough. And I said, every single person feels that way. Every single one of you in this group has said that to me privately, if not publicly. You've all said it privately. Other authors I've worked with have said the same things. And I said, but do you look at any of the books on your bookshelf and think, oh my God, that person is such an imposter. They have no idea what they're talking about. I mean, we don't, do we?
I've never done that.
We're like, oh my God, they wrote a whole book about that. They must know what they're talking about.
Right.
And so going from writer to published author is that transformation for you to, even if you're struggling with that imposter syndrome, when you are published and out in the world, it does automatically elevate you to an expert in that topic. Why? Because less than 1% of the population actually publish books.
Yeah. So for me, the safer route to visibility was being published Okay. That was the safer route for me. That was the safest way for me to do the things that you're talking about, which is to establish myself as an authority on a subject, right? And that's because I don't want to have to constantly be in people's faces. I don't want to try to yell louder than the next person. I don't want to fight for the spotlight. So for me, this was the safer, more feel-good strategy, which, being introverted, it was perfectly aligned. So I want to dive a little bit deeper into that fear of visibility, because we touched on it when we first started this, but diving into that a little bit more, over the course of history, it's literally been like, it's not okay, right? It's not okay. And it's been dangerous. Like, outright, it's been dangerous. Like, women have been punished for speaking their truth and for being visible, right? So the visibility factor alone, like, not talking about confidence, not talking about imposter syndrome, but just the fear of visibility and it being dangerous, feeling dangerous without us even actually consciously knowing that that is what is happening, that we feel in danger by being visible. What do we do to get over that fear? Was it ever a fear? Was that ever a fear for you?
Did you read my first chapter? Well, yeah, because my chapter in Aligned Leaders was very much a stepping out of the broom closet for me, because I was talking about my journey with moonology and working with the moon, which clearly has inspired a whole publishing house and a whole book of its own. But like you said that you gave your chapter to your mom to read. And I was like, oh my God, what if my mom reads this? Like, what if she's going to be like, oh my God, she's into witchcraft and she's going to go to hell when she dies. But I mean, luckily for me, actually, my mom has become one of my biggest supporters. But I was afraid of being seen. Like, I was afraid that people on my Facebook feed, people in my networks who had known me before, like when I was working regular 9-to-5 jobs and doing normal mainstream things, were going to be like, oh my God, like, who is she? Who has she become? Like, she's completely lost the plot. And it was really scary putting it out there. But I also knew that, I mean, I turned 40 last year, and I've said this before on a couple of other podcasts, which is pretty hilarious. But there was a quote that I read somewhere around the time of my birthday that said, when a woman turns 40, her last fuck flies out the window. Like, as in, you just don't care anymore what other people think, because you get to this point where you realize that we only have one go around. And if we can't live as who we are, and if we can't speak our truth, and we're not willing to do that, the only person that loses is us, right? Like, no one else is going to give a flying fuck. No one else is going to care if you don't live your best life, because they're all afraid to live their best lives. Or some of them are living their best lives because they've pushed through that fear. But we do have this fear because it hasn't been safe. And we have had to fear, and some people more than others, because there are still countries and there are still certain sections of society who are still being marginalized in different ways for whatever reason, whether it's race, whether it's religious belief, whether it's, gender or sexual discrimination, or like there are lots of reasons for people to feel unsafe when it comes to getting visible and telling their stories. And I actually had the pleasure today of talking with one of my coaching clients who has a book coming out next month. Actually, she's got like 3 books coming out in 3 months, which is super amazing. I'm so excited. And we were talking today about her journey and how she has developed this level of confidence. And part of her, so one of the things that you can do to help with confidence and the journey is having a support group. And whether it is because you are part of a collaborative book project, whether you join a writer's circle and actually meet up with other writers who may or may not be, working on different projects. Everybody might be writing their solo books, whether it's a paid program. Plenty of libraries also offer like writers' circles and facilitate things like that. It's having that support system in place can be really strong. And so I was talking with my client today, and she's part of a writing group. One of the books she's in is a collaborative book. So she's got a support container for that book, but then she's also part of a writing academy. And they have all been working on solo books and seeing each other going through the process and getting to the point. I think the first girl published her book last month. And so there's been a lot of like the hype that comes with it. Oh my gosh, the book's come out. But then there's also like some people in the group sort of feeling like, oh my gosh, her book came out first. But then again, it circles back to that person going, this is going to be you soon. This is going to be amazing. And you're going to be doing this and you're going to be doing that. And she had finally nailed her mission and her message. So she's been doing what she's doing for a couple of years now, but it's going through this process and working with these people, these support groups, but also with her publishing team, where she has finally like nailed her title, I guess, if you like. And I won't share it because I don't actually have her permission to do, like, she doesn't know I'm talking about her right now. But she'll know who she is if she's watching. And so she was like, I finally know who I am. And like people used to say, like when you look in the mirror or when you say your affirmations, like step into who you want to be. And she's like, what in the fuck does that even mean? And she's like, I get it now. She's like, I am that person. But it's been a process developing that confidence. And for her to actually do that journey, moving from writer to soon to be published author. And so I guess I really feel like support in any capacity, whether it's working with a book coach or whether you work with a business coach or a personal life coach or any kind of coach, even if you work with a therapist as well, depending on what your area is or what you're writing about, or if you've got trauma in your past, that can also be really important. Because you and I talked about this just before the episode, that sometimes because this journey can be so incredibly intensely transformational and it does have the potential for healing, but it brings up a lot of stuff. And sometimes I think if you don't have the right support in place, you don't have the support structures in place, that is where instead of becoming confident, you actually fall in a hole or hit a wall because there isn't anybody else. There's no safety net.
Yeah. I think too that there's a lot of advice out there just in general, about like stepping out of your comfort zone and like all of the comfort zone. And for me, I would rather have like what you're talking about, having a group of people that I felt comfortable and safe kind of to cheer me on. And just that act of going back to what you said before, sharing your chapter or sharing your book, right, with them first is like kind of dipping your toe in the water, right? Just like writing a chapter in a multi-author book is dipping your toe in the water for the real thing, where you are like,
writing your solo book.
You're just you, right? Because in a multi-author, you're going through that. You're not alone. You're going through that with everybody else. So it's like dipping your toe in the water. Just so the same kind of thing. It's just this like incremental kind of exposure where you are sort of pushing your comfort zone from the inside out, rather than like, oh shit, I have to like propel myself way out there in order to get anywhere. So I think that that can also really help, not only with the visibility aspect, but the confidence aspect, the imposter syndrome, all of that. If you take small little steps, little action items, where you are actually getting just a little bit outside of what you're comfortable with, because the more that you do it, the more that you're exposed to it, it's going to be like my fear of flying. It's going to be easier. So, like the more I fly and I'm still alive when the plane lands, the more I could get onto a plane, right? Same kind of thing.
Okay, let's go with that. My auntie's afraid of flying and she has to take like some Xanax and drink red wine before she gets on a plane. And believe me, I know this firsthand because I had to sit next to her and like she gripped my arm the whole flight. But
I didn't say that I didn't do that. That the more I get on the plane, maybe the less red wine and pills I have to take.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. I'm sure that will be awesome. And maybe if you have the right support team in place, it will be even easier the more you do it. But yeah. I think that's a really good point. I think it is it is those incremental steps. It is allowing yourself to not feel like you go from woe to go. Yeah. Right? It doesn't magically happen in the blink of an eye. And even when your book gets published, even if on launch day you sell hundreds of copies or thousands of copies, people don't actually read and finish the book in a day, usually. Most people don't just buy it and like dive in and binge it until the end. Unless, okay, fiction authors, this might be different because I will confess that when Kindle sends me the notification that it's downloaded on my phone, you probably won't see me until I've finished it. But that's just me. But it is this process of allowing yourself to be exposed to new levels along the way. And one of the other things I've been talking with my authors about goes back to what we were touching on about speaking your message and going back through your content and seeing how you've used this message before. But also from the perspective that I've recommended that they go and book podcast interviews and practice talking about, what they're sharing in their chapters, what they're talking about their businesses, what they believe, like all of the things. And again, using their content, but using the journal prompts, because quite often a lot of podcasts have some preset questions that they ask. And usually the podcast host will message you those questions in advance. Some podcast hosts like just a free form structure, and that's totally awesome too. If you're if you're like me and you can just wing it, that's amazing. But I know that you, Jenny, prefer to have the questions in advance because it gives you time to prepare the answers. And there have been podcasts that I've been on where that has been super useful because it gives you that opportunity to think about what your answers are and where you stand on that issue. And my authors I found that one of the questions I had asked them ended up being really similar to a question I got asked on a podcast. And I said, this is why you need to use the journal prompts, because even if not all of this information goes into your chapter, all of this stuff that you've written for your prompts can be used as social content. It can be used as blog posts. It can, it can be inspired and repurposed. It can be things that you talk about on like a live or an interview or any of a bunch of different things, because it helps you to reinforce your message. And when you're going on that journey from writer to published author, I think part of it is also speaking it into being. It is telling yourself that you are a published author. And again, to go back to talking about Denise Duffield Thomas, she shares that when she was writing her first book, I think it was Lucky Bitch she was writing at the time, that she ended up changing her email signature to say author because she was really struggling with that. Well, I'm not really an author. I'm not really a writer. And so her first thing was to put, writer in there, or author of the book, Lucky Bitch, with the title. Even though it hadn't been published yet, she was taking those incremental steps to start developing that confidence and allow herself the time to get used to it, allowing herself time to settle into having conversations. So when people would say, oh, so what do you do? And she's like, well, actually, I'm currently writing a book. I'm writing a book called Lucky Bitch, or, I'm a published author. And speaking it into being, if you are doing things like Facebook Lives or podcast interviews or any of those things, start saying it. And again, I've noticed a few of my beautiful authors talking on, so some of them are really big on Instagram and are really into reels. And one of them, after she submitted her chapter, went in and actually created a reel talking about how she'd just submitted her chapter for the book and she'd really been struggling with imposter syndrome, and she talked it all out and gave herself the space to be vulnerable so that her community were then also able to give her the support she needed to say, oh my goodness, I can't wait to read it, or I'm so excited, or, oh yes, I've been struggling with imposter syndrome too.
Mm-hmm.
Because it is that, you were talking earlier about how, like with all of the wounds, that it hasn't been safe for us to speak our truth. And one of the best things that I know of and have seen is that the right community support to allow you to be vulnerable, to allow you to share your story without fear, and allow yourself to be seen, like deeply seen by the people in that circle, is a game changer. Like it changes everything.
Well, yeah, I think just acknowledging the fact that you have the fear is a big step. Just acknowledge it and kind of let, like you're saying, let the support group that you have that's around you, that does support you, kind of like lift you up,
Mm-hmm.
But I honestly, I think that has a lot to do with it, is just saying, yeah, I'm afraid of this.
Mm-hmm.
Because we even keep that in a lot of the time. We don't even like address it or admit it. So saying it out loud and talking through it, it's huge.
Yeah, it is. Because when we keep it locked inside, it grows bigger. We know this about fear. The more that you allow it to grow, the more you try to avoid it, the bigger it becomes. But when we start to release it, when we allow somebody else to take on some of that burden for us, I think there's a saying, it's something like a burden shared is a burden halved, or something along those lines. And it is that process of allowing yourself to slowly release those fears that you have, knowing that you are supported and guided by others.
Yeah, I agree. It's part of the incremental steps too, to being or feeling safer with being visible. So
yeah. Yeah, absolutely agree. So guys, I think we're going to wrap it up. So to recap, our top tips on how to develop confidence and, navigate the journey from becoming a writer to a published author very much centers around community, actually, I think is the common thread that runs through all of these things.
Yeah.
And so firstly, by having a team before you submit it to your editors, however you are self-publishing, however you're publishing, whether it's self-publishing, whether it's traditional publishing, whether it's collaborative publishing, to put your writing out there and let somebody else that you trust and that you love and that is interested in your material, again, because not everybody that you love is going to be the kind of person who wants to read those things, and allow them to help you polish your chapter a little bit, like help give it that flow or give you the feedback that you need or give you that, oh my God, this is amazing kind of support. Then there's, as Jenny was saying, like the incremental steps and taking those bits forward, like really diving deep into your messaging, really going back and looking at your content, listening to your podcast episodes. Like I can't even tell you how, I would say hilarious, I don't actually mean hilarious, but how inspiring it is sometimes going back and listening to my own podcast episodes where I'm like, oh my God, I said some really amazing things on there that I don't even remember saying specifically. But what I then do see is I see consistent patterns in certain messages that I'm putting out there. And I'm like, oh my God, yes. Like I'm still totally aligned with that. I love that. I love that I've been talking about this for so long. And, that can be really empowering. And if you guys don't know how to find all of your episodes, one of my top tips is to go onto Spotify and Google your own name. I mean, you're not really Googling on Spotify, but search for your own name, type it into the Spotify search bar, and it'll bring up a bunch. If you've been on a few podcasts, it'll bring up like a list of episodes, and go through and like add them to your folder or add them to a playlist and go back and listen to yourself, because it's super fun. Even though it can also be really awkward listening to the sound of your own voice, I'm just saying. But yeah, so taking those incremental steps and really diving deep into your message. And then also surrounding yourself with a community of people, particularly other writers, who are going on the same kind of journey as you, so that you can all be supporting each other and understanding those steps and really being inspired by the people that are a few steps in front of you, but also so that you can be cheering on the people who are a few steps behind you and saying to them, this will be you soon, because it's that give and take, right?
I think we have a group for that.
I think
don't we have a group for that?
We do have a group for that. So if you guys are watching us live, you can see there is a link at the bottom. Jenny and I run the Women Writing Intentionally Collective on Facebook, and you can find that at facebook.com/groups/Women Writing Intentionally. So if you are a woman writer or a woman who has a business in the publishing industry where maybe you offer editing or cover design or graphics or any services that a writer may need, including retail outlets that stock indie books, please do come and join us and become part of our community, because I know I like to think, and I'm pretty sure, Jenny, you feel the same way, it is the best place on the internet. And yeah, so if you are looking for a community to hang out in and you would like to join us, we would love to have you.
Yes.
And then I think the final one was then actually looking at ways to go and speak your thing into being, speak your book into being, speak your chapter into being, speak your journey into being. And whether that is by doing things like changing your email signature or telling people that you're putting a book out there, and giving yourself that time to take that incremental space and wear the mantle of being a writer, being an author, that you've got a book coming out, that you are going and booking those podcast interviews, or even applying for media features in magazines or online magazines. And Jenny and I are actually going to be talking about that next week. We're going to be talking about press and getting yourself featured online as part of the author journey. And we're super excited for that episode. So I think these are all really important steps along the way. And if you have any feedback on that, if you're catching this on the replay, do feel free, drop us a comment on whichever platform you're watching it on, and we will get back to you as soon as possible. We would love to hear from you. Otherwise, you can also slide into our DMs on the Facebook page, Women Writing Intentionally, and we would love to hear from you. So definitely let us know if you have enjoyed this episode. Reach out to us if you'd like, and come and join us in the Facebook group. Is there anything else you want to share with everybody, Jenny?
No.
No? Okay. Thank you.
Shared it all.
Awesome. Well, thank you everybody for being here with us again tonight. We love being here with you. We love sharing our wit, our wisdom, and our magic. And we will be back again next Monday at 2 p.m. Pacific and 11 p.m. Central Europe.